Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast, where we're helping leaders live with integrity.
Whether you're a mom or a CEO, you're a leader, and how you lead matters.
Welcome back to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We're doing a really important series on sexual integrity. This topic really touches all of our lives, whether we want it to or not. And when we talk about shrinking the integrity gap between what we preach and how we actually live, it's vital. This issue is vital. It's at the center of all of our lives.
Yeah, we know that none of us does this perfectly, except Christ was the only one that lived perfect. In fact, we just celebrated Easter, and we're so grateful for Christ's forgiveness and his redemptive work. And grace means that we can't earn God's love or favor. And what Christ did on the cross sealed the deal. It's finished, and so thankful that it is.
Yeah. And however, we know that many of us, we're just afraid and still struggle with trusting God with all of our stories. Even though we love God and we profess that we want to give him our heart, our mind, our body, and our soul, we really just do struggle trusting him with our humanity, the pain of our stories, and especially our sexuality. So we have two brave guests, special people with us today, as they want to tell us more and share with us the journey of their own sexual wholeness. They are in process and they're willing to let us into their real journey together. So welcome, Josh and Jaelyn Harrell.
Hello.
Hey guys.
We're so glad to have you guys. So let's start with the fun part of your story, when you guys first met, and help us understand how you fell in love and a little bit of the background.
Go ahead, Josh. You
favorite.
tell it so much better than me.
Come on, Josh, bring it.
Well, I love our story because it's our story, but two, because it's just fun. So we met in fifth grade.
I love it.
Way back. Fifth grade, church choir was our first interaction, and all through middle school we ran in the same friend group, and I actually, and everyone knows this, I had a big crush on her in middle school, and I told her, and I just want you to all feel my pain, because her response when I said that I liked her was, "You're a really good friend, and I like your friend so and so." So if that gives you an idea. Not all stories start off with both people being in the relationship. So,
This
I brought it up in our
starting
vows,
off very well.
and so, we went through all of middle school and high school running the same friend groups. Actually, in high school, we went on frequent double dates, but we were not together. She was with a friend of mine. I was dating someone else. But we would go on these double dates, and we would always joke about how alike she and I were, and we would poke fun at it and be like, "Oh, haha, Josh and Jay should be on this date together because they're so alike." And just through, obviously a lot of times the relationships you have in high school don't stick. And coming near the end of high school, we had both come out of relationships, and honestly, we felt so excited to just be able to hang out as friends, because you don't hang out with your friend's girlfriend by yourself for obvious reasons when you're in a relationship. And so we just started spending time together as friends. And I had told her actually that, after this long relationship I had been in ended, and she was out of a long relationship too, when we were in that kind of friend building stage and getting to know each other more one-on-one, I had mentioned in a conversation that I didn't want to date again until I was sure the person I was going to start dating was going to be who I would marry. And this was, I'm a senior in high school at this point, but I early on knew how important it was for me, how much I wanted to be married and to start a family. And so I had made that comment, and then probably within a week or two, I find myself, falling head over heels for this girl that I've known for years, and freaking out, going, "Oh my gosh, I just told her the next person I date I want to marry." So, and much to my surprise, but not to my surprise, she knew that was how I felt, and we started dating that summer after our senior year of high school. She went away to college down in California. I started going to nursing school in Portland, and it was the every day, back when Skype was the big thing, every day we were on Skype for, 2 or 3 hours a night. We were texting all the time. We were calling each other, and we got probably partway through that first semester, and we were like, one of us has to move. Like, I got to go down to California, or you've got to come up here, because we both felt so sure, like we had talked about marriage early on in the months of our relationship. And I think the fact we had been friends for so many years, we didn't have to like establish a friendship first. We had already done that. And so we both knew what we wanted. And it was, she ended up graciously and lovingly moving back up to Portland. Our relationship got more serious from there, and we got married in 2014. We were both just barely 20, or sorry, 2012. What am I saying? 2014, we had a kid. 2012, we got married. We were both newly 20. We had lots of comments from people about what that would look like, but it's been, we're celebrating our 8th anniversary this year, which is super exciting, and probably in quarantine, so that'll be a whole new fun experience too. Just super grateful for the journey that we've been on. You guys will hear more about this, but our story has not been a smooth sail, perfect ride. It's been a lot of things, but it's been filled with a lot of joy, and it's been filled with a lot of, I think, just deep connection that, she's my best friend. She's the one that I get to ride all the ups and downs with. And so I don't know if she wants to add anything, but that's my little take on our story.
Nice job, Josh. Nice job. Jaelyn, tell us a little bit about the stage of life you guys are in now. You've been married 8 years.
Yes, we have 2 boys. God bless me with boys. And so we have a 5 and 3-year-old, and they're a handful and a half, giving me a taste of my own medicine, as my mom says. And it is just, it is such a fun time being a parent. It's also the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's really helped Josh and I. We really have learned, I think, the meaning of what God intends marriage to be through the challenge of children. And it's amazing just how he's used this time to reveal things to us that we needed to work on. And all through these kids that you think you're going to teach them how to grow up and, do life. And they end up teaching you more about life than you teach them.
So true.
That's great, you guys. I love what you're sharing already. And now we'd like to enter a little bit into some of the pain points. Tell us a little bit more about when you knew something was up in your marriage, and you alluded to it a little bit here. Let's begin with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll start, Josh, since I know you knew about it all along, I think. But we were going through typical marriage stuff. We got married in 2012, like Josh said, and 2014 we had our first kid, Landon, and he's 5 now. And I was just kind of convinced this is how life goes, right? Like you get tired, you grow apart, and pregnancy does things to your marriage relationship, right? And we just were kind of doing our best with what we could. We were babies when we got married. I didn't realize how much of babies we actually were when we first got married because we were 20. But we had a lot of growing up to do still that I didn't realize we did. And so I started to notice, so 2018 was when we kind of faced our issues, but I was noticing in 2017 that Josh was depressed a lot. And he was very down on himself. He was changing careers almost every year. He was one person with other people and one person with me at home. And he was in a dark place. And I remember just being the wife that wanted to help. I so badly wanted to help him. And I wanted to help him get out of this funk because I knew this wasn't who he was. And this wasn't the guy that I married. And just thinking, what can I do to help? And so I sought out Tara. I was like, Tara, please help me. I need help with this. And I came to her looking to help Josh with his depression. And I remember, Tara, you mentioned something to me about PTSD. And we went home and Josh and I talked about PTSD. And that therapy session, although I was coming in there very codependent and very, very much like not knowing all that I was kind of unearthing at this point. But Josh had been in therapy at that point for a while. He had been on medication for depression, and I just wasn't seeing anything change, right? And I couldn't necessarily feel that anything was happening. And so I thought taking matters into my own hands would be the best avenue. But I just, suggested maybe if we go this other route, what do you think about maybe talking to a different counselor about PTSD? And Josh was like, well, maybe I'll try that. And what kind of happened for you, Josh? I'll let you take it from here. What did you notice at that point?
Yeah. Well, like Jay said, I mean, I have been at that point in 2017, I had been seeking out counseling and therapy for probably a year to a year and a half already. I was on, high doses of medication for anxiety and another one for depression, and never really was getting clarity on what was going on and never really understood what was going on. And it wasn't until Jay said, "Hey, why don't you look into this person that Tara recommended?" And so I went, and I don't know what came over me in that first session. I mean, I think it was honestly just God's goodness and giving me the courage to just be brave and open up. But that first session was really where I started to discover that there was more going on inside of me than I had been willing to let people into. And a lot of that had to do with my own story and my own history. And so I had, for a long time, just to kind of give like, I guess, a broad brush, for a long time before our marriage, and Jaelyn knew this, and it was an open dialogue, but before our marriage, she struggled for a long time with a really severe pornography addiction that had really had seeped its way into my life and become a really big crutch for me. And that started back in middle school. And, at this point, we're now in our 20s and married, and had been this on again, off again thing where there were seasons where it would ebb and flow. And I remember after she had Landon, that, I guess, that vehicle for my addiction had really subsided, but I hadn't really addressed the root of why it was that I was dealing with that. And she had realized that my depression and anxiety was just getting worse and worse. And it was in that first session that I had with my own therapist on my own that I just poured out my story. I had grown up in the church. I grew up being very open about my, with leaders and with mentors about my struggle with pornography, and very open with that. But there was a part of my story that I had never really opened up about to anyone. Not to Jaelyn, not to a counselor, even though I'd seen multiple. And the part of my story that I was really scared to share, and that I think was the root of a lot of this anxiety, was that I was really struggling with my own sexuality. And being a man growing up in the Christian church, where the topic of sexuality is already so tabooed most of the time. But then to take it one step further and say, I'm actually really wrestling with my sexual identity. Like, I'm struggling with same-sex attraction, and I don't know where to go with that. I don't have a safe person to go to with that. And that, the revealing of that, and me sharing that in therapy, and then subsequently sharing that with Jaelyn shortly after, really opened up, I think, a huge wound that I had, that at the core of it was an own struggle with my own identity that I had been hiding since I was a kid. I mean, my earliest memories of struggling with that go back to when I was in late elementary school, early middle school. And here I am, 26 years old, and I've never told anyone. And so it opened up this wound that I had covered up for so long, whether it was through utilizing, pornography as an outlet, or it was, utilizing just my own sense of humor to kind of mask up the things that I was dealing with. It kind of unearthed all that, and it opened up this kind of raw, exposed space that really catapulted, the following weeks and months of our journey through that.
Yeah, so much there, both of you. Thank you for being so real and honest. Jaelyn, a couple of things I heard from you was just, you sensed something wasn't, right in your marriage, and you sensed from Josh his depression, and that things weren't getting better. And so you were trying to have a posture of helping him. And Josh, that sense of anxiety and depression were just persistent in your life. But obviously on this side of your journey and all the processing, you understand more of what was unearthed, the holding of, and is it fair to say hiding of this part of you, this struggle, and you didn't know where to go. And I can totally validate that, especially for our audience who's listening. It can be really hard in and out of the church, but particularly in the church. And if you're struggling with pornography addiction, same-sex attraction, just anything sexuality-wise can be hard to find. someone. So here you are, Josh, you're growing up in youth group, you're telling your mentors, your leaders, you even were talking to Jaelyn about your pornography issues, but something turned there in that counseling office. So I'm going to start with you, Josh. In that moment, what do you think was that turning point to help you to decide that it was time to face this part of your story that you had in since you were a little boy, you said?
Yeah, I think there was. I remember a couple of distinct turning points. I remember one in that session and just feeling like I'm just tired. I'm tired of coming into these sessions being, posing as being so authentic when in reality I'm hurting and I'm not letting anyone into it. And here I am in front of someone who is just simply here and invested in helping me move forward and helping me understand. And if I can't be real with myself and, this person who's here to help me, then what hope is there for me being real in my marriage or being real in relationships with people moving forward? And so I think there was that moment of realization that I was just tired. I was tired of, fighting a battle without the weapons and just kind of letting this thing happen to me. And so there was that moment in that session where I let it all out. And I remember my therapist, just kind of like jaw on the floor because this was our first session together. And here I am just opening up my entire, I had been through probably 50 or 60 sessions with therapists before that and never shared this. And here I am in my first one. Like I said, I think honestly, just like the conviction of the Spirit in my heart and saying like, you need to take this step of healing. That's the only reason that I did it. And so I did. And so there was that turning point there. But then I remember just a few days later, I hadn't shared with Jaelyn, about my struggle with sexual identity at that point yet. And I could tell like there was a day, I remember it so vividly, sitting on the couch in our living room. And I just felt sick. I felt this like weight on my chest. I felt a pit in my stomach. I was quiet. I was like clenched fists sitting there. And I remember Jaelyn being at the dining room table and she's like, what's going, oh yeah, there had been a situation that had happened that kind of, she thought this was a response to something else. And she said, this seems like you're having a lot of anxiety over something that seemed pretty small. And what she didn't know is that the anxiety I was feeling was not related to this other situation, but it was related to this secret that I was holding in my heart. And so I asked her to come over and we sat down, and I remember just like tears in my eyes saying, I know this part of my story and my struggles with pornography and you've known that about us, but what you don't know about my story is this. And it was just this moment of, I think it was that moment of transparency and honesty, because up until that point, I had done a pretty good job at keeping certain parts of my life and my heart pretty hidden from everyone. And and there was, as I started to move forward, I started to realize that there was a theme and kind of a thread of just low level enough deception that it didn't feel like lying that I had been doing. And it was that in that moment where I chose to open up about one of the scariest, I would argue, the scariest and hardest part of myself, opening that up to the person that I trusted the most and having to trust that she was going to be there on the other end to receive that. And so I remember that being a huge turning point in just stepping towards wholeness and transparency in our relationship that hadn't been there before.
Enormous courage, Josh. And I'm right there with you as I'm imagining the choice you had to make. And just, that I think many of us listening and those, Jeff and I, know those moments when you're just so sick of holding that and the years and years and years of that building for you. So the courage to let her in. Jaelyn, before we move forward and talk more about disclosure and how to move through that, tell us about you. What's the turning point for you in terms of you facing your story? You alluded to the fact that there's some things you've had to work on too here, not just Josh. Would you like to speak to those?
Yeah, certainly. So obviously I was very much in a victim mentality when I heard that stuff, like, I've been shot, like this is happening in my life. And it was a lot of survival mode. But I immediately sought after, guidance. And honestly, there wasn't much on this subject. And there wasn't much for me as a wife of a same-sex attracted male in the church. And the one thing I did hear, though, from listening to other betrayal stories was women who had owned their own stuff. And I was like, I don't have any stuff to own. Like, I was so in denial about all of it. But I kept open. And I think that was the really important part, because over these last 2 years of journeying through this restoration process, I've really learned that I played just as much of a part in this as he did. And to some of you listening to this right now, if you're a wife or a husband in my same situation where you've been betrayed, you might not feel like you are playing a part in this, and that's okay. Like, be there, but just know that there's huge redemption on the other side of that. Like, God has healed my story in more ways than I could have even imagined, and giving me a freedom of just like love and acceptance and worthiness. Like, he restored the worth that I always tried to find in men through my story. And I actually realized through this process that I was sexually abused while I was growing up. And it wasn't as bad, I say this in quotes, as bad as other people's sexual abuse. And I always used to write it off as that, like, oh, I wasn't this, but it was. And it took a little while for me to see what had happened in my childhood and in my story, and how that had affected me growing up, to see the woman that God created me to be, and how our marriage story and how Josh's pain and my pain coming together, and seeing God really, I mean, restored has been a word that we have clung on to in this process as a married couple, because that's really what God has done here. He has taken what was broken and shattered, and he has put it together with gold. I don't know the specific Japanese term for it, but there's a process that the Japanese go through where they create art out of broken pieces using gold, and they take the broken pieces and they put the gold in the middle of it. And it makes this beautiful work of art. And I vision that, and I think about that when I think about our marriage, because it's not perfect, but it's being pieced together with the love of Jesus and the restoration that he's done in both of our lives individually. And then when we come together, it makes this beautiful work of art because of what we've walked through.
Yeah, and before we move forward, I just want to speak back to that woman you were talking to, or that man who's a spouse that is not there yet. And Jaelyn, you're further down the road in your healing, and I think it gives great hope and beauty for someone who feels betrayed in the relationship to say there is a day when you can actually be grateful if you can lean into the healing journey. And yet there's a lot of people listening that aren't there yet, and that's okay. I love that you said that. Just, it's okay. You're right where you are. So, this is years down the road. You guys are in process and working. And so a few more questions on this, and then we're going to wrap up this part 1 and move into part 2.
Yeah, you guys, it's beautiful to hear the words that you've chosen to share this story. And I just so encouraged by it. I know a lot of people will be. Mm-hmm. I love the word that you used by Jaelyn by saying I stayed open. Mm-hmm. And that just describes the process. And that openness is not easy because initially you felt shot. You know, I want to ask you, stay in that moment of that disclosure on the couch. And Josh, your fists were tight. Jaelyn thought you were overreacting to something else that seemed more minor, but there you were. There you shared what you shared with her. How did you feel, Josh, in sharing and disclosing this and this disclosure process with Jaelyn in that moment? And then Jaelyn, I know you described how initially you felt about it and how it's worked out in the past. I'd like to hear just a little bit about that from Josh in that moment. That's a scary moment.
Yeah. It was arguably I wish I could say, I guess I'll start with this. I wish I could say that the disclosure all came in one big wave and it was a single moment and there was everything's on the table now. Everything's here. And it was like that first moment on the couch where I shared my struggle with her and I shared what had been going on in my heart. There was a huge sense of relief, I remember, in that moment, because I was like, finally, I've shared with the most important person in my life, the most important human being in my life knows this deepest part of me that I've hidden for so long. So I remember there being a huge sense of relief. I think partially because I had shared it, but I think also partially because of how she chose to receive it. It's not, she had lots of questions, and the questions only started there. It was, months and months of lots of conversations. But I just remember there just being a piece of, okay, this was the right next step, and feeling like, okay, she's staying, and maybe we can continue taking steps. Maybe we can continue moving forward in that. And like I said, if I could go back again and disclose everything at once, I don't think in that moment I was ready to, so it's probably good that I didn't. But there were other parts of my story. There were other parts of my addiction, from before our relationship and early in our relationship, that I had never shared with her. And I remember that appointment, where we sat down, and I had, Tara, you had asked me to prepare, what's called like a full disclosure, where you're sharing everything, nothing's off the table. Like it's the full deal. It's everything. And so I remember sitting down and typing out this disclosure that I kind of wrote essentially like a letter of just everything, of all the things that had happened before our relationship, within our marriage, all leading up to that moment in time. And that was looking back on it, a freeing process, but in the moment, a very gut-wrenching, painful process. Just of facing my own reality and facing my own choices that I think, because they had been kept to me, they didn't feel real, because, well, if I only know about them, then then it's not really important. No one knows, and so it doesn't really matter. But sitting down and writing it, knowing that I was about to share it with the woman who I had made vows to and promised to love and guard her heart, and knowing that I had broken some of those vows in my choices, that was hard. And that process of, and then going through and actually reading through that with her as we sat in the office with you, Tara, and I remember just, there was the weight being lifted off, because I knew everything was finally on the table. But then I remember also looking at her, and there was this new heaviness, because what I had removed for myself, she now had this entire new story and narrative that had happened behind the scenes that she didn't know about, that she was now having to absorb, or not having to, but graciously choosing to absorb, and say, okay, I'm, and listening. And then I just remember watching her response to that, and just seeing the heartache, and seeing just the pain in her eyes. And I mean, it even starts to make me tear up just thinking about it, not because I'm sad now, but because I remember just the pain, and it was hard. I mean, I think back to, my gosh, the fact that she sat through that, and the fact that she's stayed through it all, is just a testament to her gracious heart and God's work in our marriage. But it was a hard moment in our relationship, for sure.
You guys just, you're showing commitment in this, and disclosure. It's normal that initial disclosure is not full and complete, and you submit it to a process that's a healthy process of taking time, preparing in advance as the one that's disclosing, and realizing. And Josh, it's just cool to hear your voice describe how you even now recognize Jaelyn and the choice that she made to stay open, to stay in this. And she didn't have to make that choice. And it's a beautiful story. You guys are sharing it in such authenticity. So I just want to validate that.
Jaelyn, as the wife, are you willing to maybe put words to some of that pain, or what that was like for you to choose to listen to that full disclosure? Because that is part of the option. I just want to make sure people understand that that only happens really with couples who are wanting to move forward and try for restoration. And so that is a must. It's a starting point to lay a kind of come to ground zero, basically, to say, here's what we're dealing with. Here's the loss. And so, Jaelyn, walk us through that for you.
Yeah. So, like Tara said, when he first kind of told me what was going on, I really had a choice in that moment. Like, I had a choice to walk away. And I really felt like, because he had chosen to share those things, I knew that there was this person inside there that I needed to give this a chance, because he was willing to do the work. And so I obviously didn't know that not everything had been said yet. And so every time, I mean, when he told me about the pornography when we were dating, every time something was disclosed, it hurt a lot. And for those of you who think pornography is not a big deal, it is. It hurts your heart. You can say it doesn't a million times. I know I said it, but it hurts your heart. It kills your intimacy. And so that was something that we chose to step into this process, knowing that I knew it was going to be really challenging. And it felt, honestly, like my whole first year of going through therapy felt like I was wearing this weighted backpack of just like stuff that I was carrying. And I felt like I had been shot. I had all the questions reeling in my mind, and I just couldn't get them out of my head. And I was really thankful for good friends in that season that just took my kids so I could just cry, and just were there in such strong community. So thankful for that. But as I'm sitting there in that, therapy room in that moment, and just hearing him say all of these things that I never even knew about, trust was fully broken there, fully broken. And I remember I didn't really know how to feel at that point. I was just like, wow, like, I don't know what to believe anymore. So then shortly after that, I said the words that I never thought I would be saying. Tara had always said this was an option on the table, but we talked about polygraph testing, and I did decide that I wanted that polygraph test. And I didn't know it would bring me such comfort. And I never imagined I would ask my husband that ever in my life. But there had been over the time where he first told me on the couch to his last sober date, which we're actually celebrating this month, praise the Lord, there were multiple times in there where there were relapses, and there were confessions that he had made, where he was still very much in his addiction and wrestling with it. And as a wife, I was just taking everything day by day, choice by choice, and wanting to protect my own heart, but also just listening to God and listening to, like, God, are you really going to restore this? Are you really going to restore his heart? Because I want to make sure I'm not getting too hurt in this either. And so that was, for me, it was very much unknown. Like, I didn't see the finite future with us. I wanted it to work out, but I knew there was a long way to go before we were in any place of like, we're good and we're doing this. But it was really challenging as a wife to just sit there and realize the deception that had happened, that I had zero clue.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Josh and Jaelyn. This is only part one. We want you to come back to part two as we unpack even more of how did Josh and Jaelyn get from that point to where they are today, when they were sharing earlier about the joy in their marriage. Couple things that I heard both of you sharing that I just want to make sure is clear to our listeners. One of the things we do recommend in sex addiction recovery and sexual betrayal recovery is a polygraph when there is a need for some sort of accountability for someone. It's not meant to be a punishment, but it always is the spouse's choice. And what it does for the person who's disclosing is it just gives them a sense of accountability. And there's freedom in it, actually. It's a loving thing. It's not meant to be used in a court of law. It's meant to be in the process of, you're going to have this accountability of this polygraph, and here's your chance to do full disclosure. And because oftentimes there is trauma and disassociation, and we're blocking out for so many years things that we feel shame about, we don't remember it all. And so it does need to be a process. And it needs to be done well, as Jeff was saying earlier. And so what I don't want is people listening to this and to go home and to do a full disclosure, because it's like a bomb going off. And like you said, Jaelyn, you felt shot, so you could do harm. But maybe there's somebody that you can trust, that you can maybe start this process with. Maybe it's time to see a counselor. Maybe it's time to meet with your mentor and tell them the full story. But whatever it is that you're feeling as you're listening to this story, we're trusting that there is someone in your life that you can connect with, that you don't have to hide anymore. And as a wife or a husband who's wondering about things, to listen to that, to trust that discernment in you. And Living Wholehearted, we're available. We've got resources and recommendations of people that specialize here if we can't help you. So you can go to livingwholehearted.com, continue to subscribe, and we look forward to unpacking more of Jaelyn and Josh's story, part 2.
Thank you for joining us in being a leader committed to shrinking the integrity gap between the values we espouse and the values we actually live out in practice.